I have to admit that there are some things in pop culture that people may love, but which never resonated with me. Dragon Ball Z, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Beavis and Butthead are but a few that come to mind. It's not that these things are bad, they're great, but I was just a fan of something similar instead. Let me give you an example. I never really liked The Goonies. Hold on. The Goonies is a great movie, but I saw the Monster Squad first. So for me, Goonies was just another Monster Squad. Eventually I came to respect the Goonies, but the Monster Squad will always be first in my heart. Yet another example involves Tim Burton's 1988 mega hit Beetlejuice, a film that was creative, funny, and pushed the envelope of film at the time. But for a while, it took me a few years to like it. It wasn't that it was bizarre or that it had gross visuals. It was because I grew up with a different Beetlejuice. A Beetlejuice that made me laugh, and even though he was a little gross, was a good guy deep down inside. I am, of course, talking about the Beetlejuice animated series. A cartoon that revolved around a version of Beetlejuice who wasn't a gross and insane ghost trying to force a teenager to marry him, but rather a wacky trickster who enjoyed playing pranks and grossing people out. That was the Beetlejuice that I loved, and preferred over Michael Keaton's more villainous version. I'm not the only one who feels this way. Many fellow kids grew up watching the series in the 90s and fell in love with Beetlejuice and his ghoulish friends. I mean, even a few years ago, this version of the Ghost with the Most would be guest starring in an episode of Teen Titans Go. It shouldn't be surprising that many of us grew up preferring this version over the movie. The animated series was funny, had some great voice acting, as well as some incredibly creative visuals. So considering we're gonna see Beetlejuice returning to theaters after 36 years in that ghostly waiting room, I think it's time we revisit my favorite version of this iconic character. And best of all, we won't be alone this time. As one of the people who developed this show, the Vice President of Development for Nelvana, Patsy Cameron, will be joining us on this trip to the Netherworld. So let us say that infamous name 3 times and get ready for adventure and strangeness alike in this episode of Gone, But Not Forgotten. The original Beetlejuice movie was directed by Tim Burton, a visionary with an uncanny creativity to portray weird and unique imagery, which has elevated him above his contemporary directors. Burton's ability to show the isolation and alienation of many of his characters struck a chord with many individuals who identified with these topics, especially in the goth community. But what a lot of people don't know is that Tim Burton began his career as an animator. He studied animation in college and was recruited by Disney in the 1970s to become a storyboard artist, animator, art director, and a host of other roles in many Disney films. One of my favorites that he was involved in was the criminally underrated Disney flick, The Black Cauldron. Eventually, he would transition to film, and he first began to become noticed when he directed the breakout hit Pee-wee's Big Adventure. This would of course lead to his first massive hit, Beetlejuice. Due to the film's success, ABC approached Burton to create a cartoon based on this movie. But who would produce the series? Enter Michael Hirsch and the Canadian animation studio Nelvana. I got to talk to Mr. Hirsch a bit for this episode, as well as reading his book, Animation Nation: How We Built a Cartoon Empire. Hirsch filled me in on the fascinating history of his studio. Back in the 1970s, animation was creatively dying, Disney was producing a lot of duds, and in television, Hanna-Barbera was the only studio producing cartoons. Even though I love a lot of Hanna-Barbera cartoons, I will admit that they were creatively bankrupt around this time. It was a conveyor belt of one cheap cartoon after the other. Hirsch and his partners Patrick Loubert and Clive A. Smith realized that there was a vacuum in the animated field. Nelvana would be based in Canada, which had no production companies for cartoons, so they decided they would take on the lagging animation industry. And as a result, there are so many shows that they have worked on. Too many to list. Some of my personal favorites were Star Wars Droids, The Magic School Bus, Babar, Wildcats, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Sam & Max, and Savage Dragon. Nelvana's success was that they actively sought out properties that had a huge fan base, but were ignored by other studios. By the 90s, Nelvana had built a worldwide animation empire, producing quality cartoons that were popular among children and animation fans around the world. When they heard that ABC was trying to develop a Beetlejuice cartoon, they quickly ran to pitch the show. One of the key people who was involved from the beginning, Patsy Cameron, who has an amazing story of how this show came to be.
They had the heads of development from a variety of studios come together and watch the film. And then they wanted each studio to send their, like us, development people, vice presidents, to meet personally with Tim Burton and some Warner Brothers executives to pitch an idea of how we would do it. So the meeting took place, and it was the best meeting we ever had in our whole life. Everything, like Ted and I, we had worked the night before with ideas, and we took turns back and forth acting out all these funny skits with Beetlejuice and Lydia, and everything we said, Tim and the executives just threw their heads back and laughed. It was just like the best chemistry we had ever had. And at one point, I remember asking Tim, "Do you want to hear some more?" He said, yeah. And he got really excited and everything. And so when we left the room, I shook hands with him and we kind of laughed and everything. Not long after that, then we went into the office at Nelvana, and Stan Blum, who was in charge of marketing at the time, he said, "We got it." I said, "We did?" I said, "I feel like I'm going to cry. Why aren't you crying?" He said, "Well, we almost got it." He goes, "Tim Burton loves you guys." So what happened next was Tim Burton was going to London to film Batman at Pinewood Studios and asked to see us again. So Michael Hirsch and Ted and I flew to London and spent 10 days courting Tim. Telling him our ideas, how we would do it. We created characters like Jacques Laline, the weightlifting skeleton. We had a meeting with him on the set of Batman the next day. So we were literally standing against the Batmobile at Pinewood Studios with the wind blowing. And Ted said, "Well, Tim, I've got to ask you, do you want us?" And Tim said, "Well, to tell you the truth, yeah, I want you guys."
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our Joblo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
So the Beetlejuice series began to take shape. During my talks with Mike Hirsch, he said that Burton only asked the team for one thing: to introduce a new form of animation within the show. Some people have said that he asked for stop-motion animation, but Hirsch said that this was not the case. What they did instead was use computer animation for the character of Barry Meenot, who was the star of commercials in the Netherworld. Otherwise, the show had a mostly easy production, other than the standard network pushback about the possible negative effects that the show would have on kids. The core of their concerns were that kids would get hurt trying to copy the show, or if they felt that something was in poor taste.
Beginning, the censor at ABC, the first meeting we had with her, she was really grossed out by everything, a lot of it, and she was going, oh, she just like, "I can't, this is too much." So we worked together, and there wasn't any problem later, but in the beginning there was. And then I know Tim, he said, "Well, go toward the problem." Like, they didn't really want to see Beetlejuice chewing on beetles, so he said, "Let's play up, like, here's his mouth, and here comes the beetle, whatever we can do, just really milk it, and then hear this huge crunch off stage and stuff." So that he was really wonderful, Tim Burton, a very unique mind, just very unique, and also real nice, a real humble guy, very nice.
Hirsch told me that they always sought out talented actors to voice the characters. Even though some of their shows were geared to children, they wanted actors who took the job seriously. Many famous voice actors would begin their careers on Nelvana shows. The first role for legendary voice actress Tara Strong was working on a Nelvana project, My Pet Monster. But the two actors that Hirsch felt elevated the series and made it such a success were Ouimette and Allison Court in the roles of Beetlejuice and Lydia Dietz. Steven was a stage actor who had been previously working for years and had some small voice work in previous Nelvana productions. Beetlejuice would be his very first lead role in a cartoon. Steven talked a little bit about his experience auditioning for the show on the Saturday Morning Rewind podcast.
I think a lot of the people in LA thought, who's in Canada? What can they do? You know, like, they don't have anybody. And they came up, and I remember doing 9 callbacks for it. Yeah. And the last couple were sort of live hookups to Los Angeles. So I had a bunch of people, you know, from there sort of listening and saying, could you change the way you say the? Oh, that was going on. But anyway, I got it. And then our first taping, they all came up from LA and sat in the booth and listened to the first 20 minutes of the taping, and then once they saw that we were doing it, they all relaxed and went away and never came back.
In the same interview, Ouimette also said that the most difficult thing he had to overcome when he started on the series was to do the voice and not wind up not being able to talk at the end of the day. Another interesting tidbit was when he was asked about the influence Michael Keaton's voice had on his own portrayal of the character.
I watched that movie when I was auditioning like crazy, but they didn't want, they wanted that, but not for obvious reasons, because it was for kids.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't want that sort of lascivious edge, and we tried to take that out, but, you know, retain the character.
I would recommend that you guys check out this interview. One of my favorite moments is when Ouimette reveals that the cartoon actually paid for his house. But Steven was only one part of what made the show a success, the other being Lydia Dietz, voiced by the beautiful and talented Allison Court, yet another famous Canadian actress who has been in many TV shows, films, and voice roles. Her first acting gig was in Sesame Street Presents Follow That Bird. I first noticed her when she was in the pilot of the Canadian show My Secret Identity, which we've previously covered on God But Not Forgotten. But the character she is most remembered for portraying was Joblo in the original X-Men animated series. But Beetlejuice was one of her first big hits. She had been working previously for years on other Nelvana shows such as Ewoks, My Pet Monster, and the Care Bears family. Allison was a huge fan of the Beetlejuice movie and was thrilled to get the role. But the show would eventually have a negative effect on her voice, because Lydia Dietz's way of speaking wound up being so ingrained in her that for a time it was her permanent voice. She eventually overcame this when she worked on X-Men, because she said they would make her say her lines over and over until they beat Lydia's voice out of her. If only someone would try to do that with Christian Bale.
I'm gonna kick your
The Beetlejuice show was very different from the film, but at the same time kept the movie spirit. Beetlejuice was now more of a trickster who was best friends with Lydia. He was constantly pranking people and causing trouble in the Netherworld. Usually Beetlejuice would get in trouble for running some kind of scheme, but this would always lead to a disaster, especially whenever he tried to help out Lydia. A great example is in the episode Laugh of the Party. In it, Beetlejuice tries to help Lydia throw a party that would make her high school rival Claire Brewster jealous. It's interesting how the Beetlejuice cartoon was the first series to show a group of friends who were considered strange by others. Since then, other animated series have also taken that concept and run with it. Gravity Falls is a perfect example of this for the portrayal of Mabel and her friends. Although there were 2 characters from the movie who were never featured on the show, the Maitlands. I asked Patsy why Barbara and Adam Maitland were not in the series, and she said,
At first, when we first started developing it, then we met with ABC and had meetings with them, and they were considering having the Maitlands in it, but then it just didn't seem like that felt like too many characters, too complicated. We had Delia Dietz became a pretty big character there, Lydia's mother and stepmother. And yeah, it just felt like too much. Like the core of it was Lydia and Beetlejuice's relationship. Then you had the new characters in the Netherworld, but also it was fun. We got to create some new characters for Lydia's private girls' school, Bertha and Prudence, and they were fun. So yeah, it just felt like too many characters to do it with the Maitlands for sure.
Those new characters that populated the afterlife: Ginger, the tap-dancing spider, the monster who lives across the street, whose look was designed on the classic Bugs Bunny villain Gossamer, and Jacques Laline, a skeleton who was obsessed with being in shape. Ginger the spider was sweet and full of energy. She always dreamed of being a famous dancer. Even though Beetlejuice would play pranks on her, she would still help him whenever he got into trouble. I remember always feeling sad whenever he'd make Ginger cry. She was voiced by Tabitha St. Germain, an actress who is still working in animation today, with many My Little Pony fans recognizing her as the voice of Princess Luna and other ponies. Jacques Laline was another one of Beetlejuice's friends, who was constantly dealing with the fallout of Beetlejuice's schemes and pranks. One of the funniest aspects of the character is his French accent, and how he's constantly working out to stay in shape even though he is just a skeleton. He was voiced by the late Charles Carr. The monster across the street was Beetlejuice's neighbor, who hated Beetlejuice for constantly playing pranks on him and his dog, Poopsie. Patsy elaborated more for us on the origins for some of these characters.
When we created the monster across the street, how that started is Ted had a neighbor across the street who we just called Johnny across the street. So we just made a monster across the street. And I think it was really Bob and Bud that turned him into a Western guy with a hat. And then I think Ted created my little dog, Poopsie, and it just kind of evolved into this weird character. And he said, "What in tar hooties?" The fun origination of some of these characters, like at the time, my interests, I took tap dancing. So I thought a tap dancing spider. And then Ted named her Ginger after Ginger Rogers. With a skeleton, I knew we had to have a skeleton, and I was interested in weightlifting, and so was my dad, so I made it a weightlifting skeleton. Then Ted named it Jacques Laline, after Jacques Laline. And I remember Tim Burton laughing and saying, every show's got to have a French skeleton. Like, it just seemed so weird, you know?
Yeah.
Other characters in the show were Lydia's friends, Bertha, voiced by Tara Strong, and Prudence, voiced again by Tabitha St. Germain. Bertha and Prudence were a bit quirky, and due to this, were outsiders who found a deep connection with Lydia. I love this part of the series because it was essentially saying to kids that it was okay to be a little weird, and that it was nothing to be ashamed of. The stuck-up Claire Brewster would serve as one of the main antagonists on the show. One cool little Easter egg on the show was the character of Prince Vince, a nod to Tim Burton's very first animated short for Disney, Vincent. The Beetlejuice cartoon would become a massive hit from the get-go. It eventually won an Emmy and aired on both ABC and Fox, with ABC airing it on Saturday morning and Fox airing it from Monday to Friday. This was incredibly rare to have two networks sharing the same show while it was still being produced. Most of this show's appeal was that it didn't talk down to kids. It was fun and found clever ways to teach some moral lessons. One of my favorite episodes was the one called Skeletons in the Closet, an episode which was written by Patsy. It revolved around Beetlejuice getting in trouble for telling all of his lies. Whenever he tells a lie, a ghostly skeleton is formed in his closet, and eventually they escape whenever he tells one too many lies, which forces Beetlejuice to tell the truth in order to destroy them. Danny Elfman would return from the movie to also record the music for the show, and as he had done before, created a theme song that was both unique and evoking Tim Burton's sensibilities. Unlike most directors of Tim Burton's stature in the industry, he was actually deeply involved with the show. Patsy confirmed as much with us by saying,
he was involved in a really positive way. For instance, we still had several meetings with him in Los Angeles. Again, we flew with him to Toronto for the pilot recording and the first episode of the second season. Yeah, he stayed involved, and he was just super complimentary, funny. I remember once we met him, he was staying at a hotel in Hollywood, and we were pitching premises, and one of them, I think Claire was going to get possessed or something, and he looked at me and he laughed. He goes, "Possession," and he started laughing. So Yeah, he was definitely involved.
One of the most surprising things that I learned was that there were no religious groups who were upset about this cartoon. I mean, you would think that considering that the show was about ghosts, goth girls, and a main character who was as gross as Beetlejuice, someone would say something, but no one said a word. Even after the show won itself a deserved Emmy for Best Outstanding Children's Show. Still, Beetlejuice has gone on to become a cartoon that broke new ground in both animation and storytelling. It came out at the perfect time in American animation history, as new cartoons such as Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, Batman the Animated Series, and X-Men were making leaps and bounds in animated style and stories. The show does get overlooked at times due to so many groundbreaking shows being released around the same time, but the Beetlejuice series has stood the test of time and still holds up to this day. And Tubi has just uploaded the entire series in time for the new Beetlejuice movie. I personally recommend that you buy the show on DVD though. Even though it does not have any special features, it looks great on my DVD shelf. If you want more information on Nelvana, then pick yourself up a copy of Animation Nation: How We Built a Cartoon Empire by Michael Hirsch. It's a very interesting read, and when I last spoke to him, Michael told me that he's currently in talks to make an audiobook version of it. As for Patsy Cameron, she told me that she, her husband, and her son are working on a new animation studio called Giddy Guffaw Productions. So the future certainly looks bright for them, and I know they will hit it out of the park. By the time this episode comes out, the new Beetlejuice movie should already be in theaters. Maybe it's because I've just rewatched the series, but I think I see a little bit more of the cartoon in this new Beetlejuice movie. Then again, perhaps I'm just high with nostalgia. For now though, let us say that name 3 more times and get ready to jump into the world of weirdness that was Beetlejuice, the animated series. I'm Jesse Shade speaking on behalf of David Arroyo for Joblo.com, and thanks again for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the Joblo Originals channel. Tell all your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We are an independent company that appreciates all of your support, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Gone, But Not Forgotten.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. Joblo remains an independent company, and we appreciate all of your support.